What is poppin', people? You got JBear here, bringing you all power rankings for the third season of the SPL, the VGC Draft League. And so yeah, this will probably be a pretty long video, so feel free to, pause, take breaks, and what else? Like, comment, subscribe, so that you can watch all of the analyst content I will be making for this season of the SPL. So yeah, going into power rankings, a little bit about what they are. They are trying to take a look at the teams objectively. Nothing about the coaches, just the teams that they will be using. And just because a team ranks low on the power rankings doesn't mean that it's a bad team. I actually think that every coach drafted a pretty solid team this season. It was a really hard ranking to make. And just because a team scores low on the power rankings doesn't mean it will do badly, or I think the coach is bad. It's just, as far as the team goes, I don't think it stacks up quite as well to the rest of them, but it is still going to be a fundamentally solid team. What other power ranking disclaimers? Oh yes, this is my opinion, so feel free to disagree with me. You can even leave that in the comments down below. I'm happy to engage with you all. But yeah, feel free to share your own opinions below, and in the description I will leave a link to a tier maker so that you guys can make your own power rankings and potentially share them in the server as well. So yeah, feel free to do that. I'm curious to see what everyone else thinks. And then this video won't probably be the most visually stimulating. It's going to be a lot of me talking. You'll see once I go on to the rankings, you'll see like the teams and their ranking next to it. But other than that, like there's not going to be too much else on the screen. So just feel free to like put this on podcast style, even if you really wanted to. Put it on 2x speed if that's your fancy. And yeah, let's just get right on into it with our number 20 team. That would be the Miami Dolphins, coached by Kyle A. And you look at this team and you're like, dang, it's got some great VGC threats. I'm going to try this power ranking to kind of go through every mon individually as well, just so you guys understand what they are all about in the VGC scene. So we've got Incineroar, which is a great fake out option. It's, the best. It is ubiquitous with VGC. I think it's a little bit less good in Draft League, and I'll get into that as well. Amoonguss is great for redirection. Primarina, you've got a little bit of spread damage. Espathra's got some great fast utility with the speed boost. It can do all sorts of things. There's Driftblim, which typically you see on like terrain teams with Unburdened. There's no terrain present here, but we'll figure something out with the Driftblim. Vikavolt's a good anti-trick room option. Superior, I actually like on this team with the Primarina and the Incineroar. It gives some like nice pledge options, which could potentially be a little bit of fun shenanigans if Kyle is interested in that. Rhydon is not only a lightning rod user, but also pretty solid in trick room, and is actually seeing some usage in Reg G right now, which is pretty cool. Iron Valiant is kind of a very frail attacker. It's also got some solid just support moves with like coaching and wide guard. And then Hydreigon I actually think was a sleeper pick for the draft, being able to get that in the final round. Great damage dealer. It's got some solid utility. I really like Hydreigon with just like Snarl and Breaking Swipe, really slowing the opponent's pace of play down, which I think is the goal of Kyle's team. I just don't necessarily think that it will be able to do the best compared to the rest of the teams in the league. He definitely can do well on the back of that Incineroar and Amoonguss, but I find that those threats are a little bit easier to be prepared for in Draft League compared to a standard VGC environment, where he will definitely be facing a safety goggles, probably a Terra Grass or two, because Terra Grass also looks pretty good into the squad overall, as does Terra Fairy, and those are good types to want to be. And so when you're kind of forcing, I say in quotes, your opponent to Terra into good types, it doesn't necessarily feel all that bad for them. But still, obviously on the back of Incineroar and Amoonguss, anything is possible. We've seen tried and true how they can do at the standard VGC events, but I just don't necessarily know how they're going to do in draft. So yeah, that will be our 20th ranked team. I'm going to try to get through them pretty quickly so it's not too long of a video. 19, we have Necra and the shoutcasting Sylveons. And so for this team, I thought that it's a very fundamentally solid team, starting with Ogerpon Cornerstone and Volcarona. You get a really nice follow me sturdy Pokemon with the Ogerpon Cornerstone that can also output solid damage. And then Volcarona as like a bulky setup or support option. And starting that off and then adding Suicune, which is like a really solid bulky Tailwind or just like Calm Mind threat potentially. Tailwind that you're not going to be going down in one. You're not immune to fake out, but you're not going to flinch thanks to your inner focus. the duo of steel types, Klefki and Hisui and Gudra, I think kind of could have been better options on this team. Obviously, the screens are going to be great. You're going to be playing a very bulky playstyle, even with, like, as you guys can see, the rest of the team. The Zarude can play quite bulky. Slitherwing's relatively bulky. Lapras is solidly bulky as well from a low point pick. The only real, like, non-bulky threats on the team are Palmot and Mismagius. And then the speed tiers on this team are also a little bit clumped, which, you know, not the worst thing in the world, but, like, the fastest mon being Ogerpon might be a little bit annoying, and then your slowest mon being only like Hisui and Gudra or Lapras are not going to feel the best into, like, the hard Trick Room, and also not going to feel the best into the super fast offense. That being said, priority is pretty solid with the Slitherwing's first impression. You got Fake Out from the Palmot, and overall this team can do well. It's just a little bit too bulky for my taste without having as much immediate offense. One Pokemon that I really want to shout out here, though, is the Zarude. I think it has the potential to do some silly stuff. Just jungle healing. In singles, it's 25% and healing a status. In doubles, it does that for you and your teammate, which means that we could potentially have, like, Zarude healing up the team while potentially even setting up itself. It just does seem like a potential Terra Hog, and a few of the Pokemon on this team do seem like they really, really do want the Terra, like the Volcarona in a lot of matchups. Even Hisui and Gudra sometimes will want it on, like, the more bulky sets. Ogerpon Rock is, though, pretty good because it does not necessarily want Terra because it doesn't want to lose its Sturdy. So overall, just a solid team, just a little bit too bulky for my preferences, and a little bit like the speed tiers, just making it, I think, a little bit harder to prep with week in and week out. But I assume Necker likes the play style of setup, and so it'll be definitely a team that can facilitate the setup options. Going into our 18th ranked team, you see the Montreal Ice Qs coached by Amel. Obviously, Amel is trying to do something creative, and I think he succeeded in a creative team centered around two mythical Pokemon in Hoopa Unbound, which will be the strongest legal expanding force. The Deoxys attack does have a slightly higher special attack set, but Hoopa obviously the strongest legal expanding force, and it's a slight graphical error. He has the Indeedee female for redirection, so you'll see Indeedee male on a team later on. But the Indeedee female providing Psychic Terrain and redirection for the Hoopa is great. And Hoopa is a great Tail Room Pokemon. It's just slow enough where in Trick Room you can really pull off some shenanigans. And outside of Trick Room, you're able to go into Tailwind mode with that Shaman Sky, the fastest natural Tailwind setter, and do some potential damage. Okie dokie is usually used for, like, anti-intimidate, although this team isn't too weak to intimidate, so overall you're pretty good to potentially run Toxic Chain, start to spread around status. Skeledirge as an unaware wall does like Terra a lot, but I'm actually a fan of what it can do. Sandy Shocks is an interesting speed control option for this team. He's got a little bit of a Rain Core with Politoed and Golduck, and Golduck also has some utility into other weather matchups where potentially the Politoed's matchup isn't great, but you can still run Cloud9. Alcremie for Decorate support. The team might be a little bit too frail, I think, to truly abuse that to its full potential, but still a decent option. And then Glalie, I don't necessarily, it has, like, the inner focus ability, so it can, like, do stuff without necessarily worrying about Fake Out, but overall it's kind of just a Glalie. One thing that I do want to shout out, though, is that Hoopa can get through Protect with its signature Hyperspace Fury to bypass Protect, almost acting like an Urshifu with a Dark-type move that can bypass Protect. My main critiques from this team center around, it kind of trying to do that Tail Room thing, but it kind of ends up as, like, a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none style team, and the bulk and the offense, I don't necessarily know how well it meshes. And so I do think that on the back of Hoopa, we could potentially see, like, a Hoopa kill leader season, but just, like, the team necessarily not being able to put up the numbers around it. And so I think, great potential, just maybe not a team that I would pick myself. Going to the number 17 slot, we have That's a +1 and the Baton Rouge Butterfrees. And I just want to throw out a disclaimer. This was, like, the hardest team I think I had to rank. Maybe second hardest, because there's another team now that I'm thinking about it that I might say this for as well. But Whimsicott is the main reason why. Whimsicott is so good. It's actually one of my favorite Pokemon to use in VGC Draft, just because you put anything next to a Whimsicott, it looks like the best Pokemon on the field. So that's what I chose to pair it with the Regidrago. Regidrago acts a little bit linearly in contrast to the Whimsicott, you know, doing everything, but spreading out the strong dragon type damage, forcing potential Terra Fairies, which we try to exploit later on, or potential like Terra Steels, which looks pretty solid into the next Pokemon, Jirachi, as well. Unfortunately, Jirachi lost Follow Me in the Generational Shift, but it's still a very solid utility option. You guys are familiar with Jirachi in single battles on my channel. I've used it plenty of times, but it has great utility. I'd like to shout out like the potential like Icy Wind for speed control, or like another Trick Room setter, and it can also output like solid-ish damage, and opponents have to worry about flinching, especially if they want their Covert Cloak on something else, because of like the Weavile for on like fake out pressure, and also just like fast priority with Ice Shard, and really fast just like good dual stabs, and a secondary beat up user for the Terrakion that's picked up. I'm skipping over the Zoroark for a second, but Terrakion obviously getting that +4 attack immediately next to either the Whimsicott or the Weavile potentially, so that's something that teams will have to watch out for, is just having to eat a +4 Rock Slide. Knowing it's coming makes it a little bit easier, but it's still a very fundamentally solid strategy. And then backing up Zoroark, if you look at every Pokemon on this team pretty much, I don't think that there's any abilities that would show that they're triggering, other than like if he decided to go pressure on Weavile, which, you know, with a Zoroark you just don't. So that's a very solid option, because they just won't necessarily know about anything being a Zoroark, and especially when a Pokemon like Regidrago forces like specific Terras and such, having to also consider Zoroark makes it even harder, which I do like the placement of Zoroark on this team, and I know that's a very big Zoroark fan. Electivire, good for Follow Me pickup. It's actually slightly slower and slightly less bulky than Electabuzz after an Eviolite, but obviously it has access to the item, it doesn't have to run Eviolite. Chandelure I really like as a way to potentially dissuade Trick Room, because this team does run really fast, so if Trick Room does get up, it might be a bit of an issue, and that's kind of why I had to knock it a lot, because I think the hard of the hard Trick Room teams might be able to do really well into a build like this. So just something that I wanted to note. Gliscor potentially as an attacker with Hypercutter, or as like a bulky stally option with the Toxic Heal. Both are great. And then Wartortle, I really like Wartortle. I think it has a lot of good utility with like Fake Out and such at such a low price point. So overall, a very fundamentally solid team. Just kind of seems, like I said with Amel, a little bit too like trying to do too many things at once. And especially when you can only bring 4 Pokemon to a game, I feel like the defensive synergy just isn't quite there, and like especially into like potential Trick Room modes, I'm a bit worried about how this team will fare, but next to a Whimsicott, there's a way. So going into our number 16 team, we have the Crimson Seabad and the Detroit Steel Wings, and this team has Fluttermane, which obviously is broken, but Fluttermane can't do everything on its own, so let's see what it is paired with. There's Gothitelle for potential trapping shenanigans. Illumise I really like as kind of a budget Whimsicott. Lose some of the utility, but you don't lose things like Tailwind and Sunny Day and Fake Tears, which make Fluttermane almost unguardable. And Iron Moth also loves the Sunny Day. I will like to say between the two, it might be tough to divvy up the booster energy, just because both of them really like that booster speed. And it's also the first Mon at 110, also with the Raichu and the Latios. Raichu providing Fake Out and a Lightning Rod option. I don't necessarily know how needed the Lightning Rod was here, but the Fake Out was definitely very much appreciated. Latios as a solid, bulkier Tailwind setter, at least compared to the Illumise, still very offensive. Hirayama as a great secondary Fake Out. I really think more of the primary Fake Out for this team. Some of the Mons are a little bit out of in a wacky order, just because Seabad made a few transactions in the grace period, which I think helped the team out a lot compared to what it was. Valerian Weezing I'm not so sold on here, and that's kind of something that really docks the team, is all of these Pokemon, not all, but a lot of them really like their abilities. You got like Gothitelle, Illumise, the Paradox is like having their photosynthesis if they're running their booster energy. Hirayama likes its choice between Guts and Thick Fat. Raichu likes the Lightning Rod. Latios usually likes Levitate. So I'm just not sold on the Galarian Weezing pickup here. And ultimately, I just wish there was a little bit more physical offense. I'm kind of neglecting the bottom 2 picks, Greedent and Krokorok. They can do things, especially like Krokorok has some solid utility with like Snarl and Breaking Swipe and Intimidate. It can be a good damage reducer. But the team lacks a vision, which I mean, Seabat I'm sure has a vision for it, but from an outsider looking in, it really does lack a vision. And that's kind of why I'm docking it a little bit in my opinion, just not quite up to the level, but still there's some fundamentally solid individual Pokemon. So I think that the team can perform well, and we might even see like a kill leader Fluttermane season. On this team, I would predict that Fluttermane ends up as the kill leader. It's pretty well supported, just the rest of it kind of out of focus. Moving into our number 15 slot, we have the Melbourne Rotoms. This is our first team that only has 9 Pokemon, and it's a very hard Trick Room team with Cresselia and Ursaluna as the first 2 picks. He was on the wheel, so these 2 were picked together. Cresselia is a fantastic Trick Room setter next to Ursaluna, and I do think that Aaron really did maximize how he could use this Ursaluna this season. We are going to, I assume, most weeks see hard Trick Room options, but it can do fine because of that. Obviously Guts Facade being incredibly strong, and there's not really a Terra type that you can do to be immune to or resist both Facade and Headlong Rush or Earthquake, and I do think he did position this team well to be able to spam Earthquakes. Grimmsnarl, I think, was a great option to set up these screens, as well as have fake out utility, and in draft, Grimmsnarl can pull off a variety of sets, can do like Thunder Wave for potential speed control if he wants to go for a fast mode, although that is kind of why I do end up docking this team, is just because there isn't really a fast mode. The natural speed comes from Spectrier, which is kind of on an island at like such a fast 130 base speed tier. It does do solid damage with the ghost type Shadow Ball, potentially like doing solid damage to dissuade people from going Terra Ghost for Ursaluna, which is otherwise a decent Terra type, to potentially be immune to fake, or be immune to Facade, also be immune to Fake Out, but be immune to Facade and not be weak to Earthquake or Headlong Rush. So I do think that it, like in theory, is a pretty solid offensive combination, but I'm just unsure about its role otherwise. Enamorous Therian, I think, is a great Trick Room option, not too explored in official VGC, and I feel like not too explored in VGC Draft either, but it does output really solid damage and has incredible bulk. I've used it in the singles Draft League world, and I was pretty impressed by it when I had it. And so I think it can do some solid option, acts as a solid special attacker for Trick Room to complement Ursaluna. Our second ground immunity of the... our third ground immunity, is Vivian. And Friend Guard plus Rage Powder, it can really disrupt teams, especially if Trick Room doesn't necessarily go up right away. It can, provide some early game life to the team with, like next to Ursaluna, for example, before like a Cresselia plus Enamorous Trick Room endgame. I do think, a lot of teams will lead in preparation to stop the Trick Room and may get foiled by a more offensive lead, and I think that is a good vision from Aaron to have. Torracat acts as a faster budget Incineroar. I do like to point out that Torracat is actually much faster than Incineroar, meaning that the parting shots are much faster, or much slower in Trick Room, depending on how you go, but it otherwise has Incineroar's toolkit minus the dark typing, which I also think is a bit valuable, but I think he has a dark type already present on the draft in Grimmsnarl, and so I think that Torracat will be able to do just fine as a budget Incineroar. Wo-Chien is another interesting pick. I haven't seen it too much in the draft scene, weakening the attack of everything, and maybe next to Ursaluna you're going to try to prevent its attack from being weakened, but it still outputs such a surplus of damage that the opponents will probably be feeling that attack nerf more than you will. And it's a solidly bulky Pokemon in Trick Room. I know a lot of people are going to expect Moxie Boosted to pick it up, but no, it actually ended up on the Melbourne Rotoms. And then the last pick was the Paldean Aquatoros, giving a second Intimidate Pokemon, one that I think is a little bit more consistently bringable than the Torracat. And I would just like to say, like, this team, it is relatively low on the power rankings, but if we were doing a Trick Room power rankings, it would be 1 or 2. It is super good in the Trick Room. It's just, Trick Room won't always be up, which I had to factor into my rankings. But that being said, still really, really solid potential. I'm just a little bit worried about the out of Trick Room modes, and just a little bit interested in, the vision that he has for some of the faster Pokemon on the team. Going to our number 14 pick, or number 14 power rank, we have the second Trick Room, bro. I think it's really funny that they ended up right next to each other. This Trick Room centers around a special bear in the Ursaluna Blood Moon with Farigiraf, which is a pretty common core, at least it was in past regulations, and it was at the very start of Regulation G as well. But I think that this one's a little bit better in my opinion. I really like what Farigiraf does with its ability to block priority, and I like that this team leans a little bit more on strategies outside of Trick Room. They have a pretty solid Trick Room core with the Ursaluna, Farigiraf, Glastrier, and Brute Bonnet or Smeargle as solid options. And then you also have a really solid Sun mode with Murkrow, Hisuian Typhlosion, Great Tusk, Brute Bonnet, and then Toxapex is on the team as well to round it out, just as like a solid bulky pick. Overall, I think that the team, it's just missing, I don't want to say missing some roles, because Smeargle can do it all, but like Smeargle's the real only fake out of the team. Brute Bonnet has Rage Powder, but it's the only true follow me on the team. The Trick Room setters are, I believe, just Farigiraf, so it might be have to be in a secondary Trick Room setting mode. But overall, the team doesn't necessarily need the Trick Room to be up, and I do actually think that the Sun mode ends up being a pretty strong option for this team. And I'm really curious to see how Clover decides to use the Smeargle, because obviously, from an outsider looking in, I have no clue how Smeargle is going to be used. It's just so versatile that like there's really nothing that can indicate to me, what exactly the Smeargle is going to be doing here. So now our number 13 pick. I just want to say, like, this kind of, in my opinion, there's like a slight jump from 14 to 13. Still, I think the teams down here are going to be more than capable, but up at number 13, I had Nexus and the, I forget his team name, gonna be something Tyrants, I think Toronto, but we're starting it off with the Iron Hands. Iron Hands is a super busted Pokemon, has like an incredible stat spread, can tank physical hits with ease without even really investing, especially into the giant HP stat, leaving you to be able to invest in your attack to do plenty of solid damage, as well as in your special defense with like, it's one of the most reliable Assault Vest Pokemon in the game. And Nexus also decided to take this the Sunroom route, but a little bit more of a traditional Sunroom, with the Lily Cole strategy up next. When I was first getting into VGC back in Gen 8 VGC Draft, Lily Cole was a strategy that I gravitated to as well, with like the Trick Room, Sun Room aspect. And I do think that it's going to be able to help Nexus, especially, I don't know how much experience he has in the format, but I think it's a great strategy to lean on, just because After You Eruption is so strong, but also Sleep Powder can rob games that Nexus had no business of winning, but also lose games that he had no business of losing just because of a Sleep Powder miss. So it's a bit unfortunate, but I do really like that the Hisuian Lilligant can output much more solid damage than regular Lilligant, just because of that stab close combat option. And then the Trick Room setter of choice is Porygon 2, which I really like. There's additional Trick Room setters down the team, but Porygon 2 will be your main one. And I really like also how like Porygon 2 can potentially get off some solid damage on the offensive side of things, and like Iron Hands plus Porygon 2, your Trick Room will be going up no matter what, and you'll have two solid attackers ready to rumble in it. And the Sun threats Nexus chose, I also think are particularly good. Walking Wake and Charizard, I guess, and then the Lilligant as well to be your physical Sun threat. But Walking Wake, I think, has it's very well positioned as a water type in the Sun, and a lot of the water resists really do get fried by the rest of the team. So I think that Nexus's Sun mode is pretty solid, and then Charizard, obviously with incredible damage output in the Sun with like just Choice Specs, Heat Wave and such, can do some solid damage and can also be pretty fast. I do think redirection was important on this team, just so that if you're not in Trick Room, you can still get your Trick Room attackers to either set the Trick Room or get off their one strong attack. And you can do that with Clefable, which for the most part isn't going to die in one hit, doesn't necessarily mind being in the sun, in fact really enjoys it for its recovery in Moonlight, and can output solid damage when it needs to. So I think that overall, Clefable does have a great role as Follow Me. I would like to point out, you normally see Clefairy in VGC, and that's because Clefable does not have access to Friend Guard, so you're going to be seeing more traditional, usually Unaware, sometimes Magic Guard. Bruxish, I would also really like to highlight. People in the single sphere might not know, but it pretty much has the same ability as Serena and for draft in the Dazzling, so you do have to give up, your strong jaw attacks, but in exchange, you don't have to deal with priority, which can, dissuade Fake Out. In the Trick Room can mean that you're getting through your Trick Room turns and being able to be a little bit more efficient with them. So I think that it was a great pick up for Nexus. The Misdreavus, it's not Flutter Mane, but it's a solid, bulky, levitating option. Has a few niches and a few matchups, can be pretty solid. And then Malamar has some interesting applications as well, obviously as a contrary attacker. But overall, I think it's really going to be that top 6 Pokemon are going to be the most bringable, with Bruxish as well. So I think this team is solid. It just might be a little bit too reliant. It does have 2 conditions in either Sun or Trick Room, but it kind of does need at least one of them to be up in order to be doing well, if not both. So that's why Nexus is our number 13 team. Number 12, we have Viz. Viz picked off a really solid offensive core, which I know is his preferred playstyle, at least from how I've seen him play in the past, starting with the Urshifu single strike. And the whole goal is to try to be as unguardable as possible. And you can do that with Urshifu single strike, obviously hitting through Protect. It's going to be a great option for the team. And then Iron Crown really punishes the fairies, I think, getting that immediate steel type offense. And Iron Crown has been a Pokemon that's really impressed me as I've seen it in VGC Draft. And then Dragapult often might even go unnoticed, when they have to check those top 2 Pokemon. Being able to hit from either the physical or the special side with potential Terra Dragon Outrage, or even Terra Blast from the ghost side, giving actual physical ghost offense. It can be great spreading status, Will-O-Wisp Thunder Waves, or putting up screens, Reflect Light Screen. Incredibly solid coverage, can do a whole lot of things, and that's why I really like this top 3 and the offense that it provides. Entei is great priority for the team. Obviously Urshifu Sucker Punch, but it's not unconditional like Entei's extreme speed is. It's almost like, you wish that it was like Chien-Pao Entei, but obviously Chien-Pao's on a different team, so you got another strong dark type in Urshifu single strike. And he rounds out the team with some pretty solid partners. Araquanid is a Pokemon. It has some very solid, with Terra, its abilities actually mesh really well. So that's something to note with Water Absorb and Water Bubble, flipping some type matchups that opponents might not consider. Meowstic is a great utility for Fake Out and a shit ton of other solid supporting moves like Thunder Wave, Screens, things that the rest of the team can do, but probably won't, but the Fake Out is unique. Florges actually has an ability now with abilities that only work in doubles. It's still not the most applicable abilities, but they actually can do something, and so I'm curious if Viz will use it, but otherwise just a solid bulky fairy type that can output solid damage and enjoys, being able to Terra offensively potentially. Before I get to the Regigigas Coughing, we'll just shout out Yanmega. Wolfie obviously used it in a regional, so that's how people know of it. But also in Draft League, you have the option to run Hypnosis if your matchup isn't as good, or if you're just gonna feel like getting lucky. It's got some solid utility moves like Lunge to lower stats. So I think Yanmega is pretty solid, especially at the price point. It was really cheap for a pretty fast Tailwind. And then Regigigas plus Coughing. This was actually a hot commodity. You guys have no idea. People really were interested in their Coughing Gigas strategies. So I'm curious to see if Viz will end up bringing it. I'm sure he will. But other than that, other than really Urshifu and Meowstic, the abilities on this team aren't too important. So potentially shutting them off for a little bit isn't too bad. Unlike the Galarian Wheezing that we saw previously, I think this Coughing fits a little bit better because also it's not coming as often. And Regigigas still has utility without the slow start. It's got Wide Guard as another, Wide Guard user, can spread status and be an overall nuisance. So going into our number 11 slot, the Miami Palafins, coached by Tone. And I really think that just from a pure power level, you might disagree with me on this one, starting with Overpaw and Hearthflame, Bonk with the Ivy Cudgel, Terra Fire, kills even through resists, which is super strong, and pairs up with Keldeo to immediately punish anyone thinking they could Terra Fire. Now Terra Dragon becomes an issue, but Tone has ways to mitigate that. Volbeat is incredible support, you know, Prankster Tailwind, I mentioned it with Illumise, pretty similar movesets. Prankster Tailwind and Sunny Day is potentially useful for the Ogerpon, but Tone may want to not necessarily opt for Sunny Day when he's got Tyranitar and Excadrill. Tyranitar is great with the Sand because it really punishes opponents wanting to use the Focus Sash, but Tone can strategically use his Focus Sash on a Pokemon that, you know, he can use it with on Volbeat, and because Volbeat may not want to come in the matchups where the Sand comes, so he still has a perfectly useful Focus Sash where the opponents don't. And Excadrill, you obviously pair that with the Tyranitar, you get a fearsome Sand Core. Salamence is really versatile. I like how it fits on the team, as you know, it can range from an Intimidate Pokemon, which the team otherwise lacked, all the way up to a Moxie Physical Sweeper. So I really think most of the time it's actually going to lean on its special offense and Intimidate capabilities, but there will be some matchups where the physical side and the sweeping aspects look good. Gardevoir is kind of the team's main anti-Trick Room options other than like solo Tyranitar, which is part of the reason why I knocked this team a little bit, just because the Trick Room options, if it goes up, might be a bit of a struggle. But Gardevoir can, you know, it has a really good imprison with a lot of the utility moves that Trick Room teams like to run. Kilowattrel is great as either a very fast Tailwind setter, or if the Volbeat's setting it, it can actually get a power boost from the Tailwind being set for it with the Wind Power ability, and offload some really, really strong attacks. And like you can do like some Disquake things next to like Excadrill, for example. And Chinchino is like a solid damage dealer. Unfortunately, there really isn't like good fake out on the team. I don't believe that there is any fake out on the team, which I think would have been really helpful just for a lot of these strong attackers. Having the fake out option is really nice. Ogerpon is the follow me option, which I think is actually a pretty solid follow me user, just because most turns you're kind of already worried about it just completely knocking you over the head with Terra Fire Ivy Cudgel, so that when it follow me's, like a lot of the time your game plan can be cooked if you're not really accounting for it, especially the first time it happens. Because it also just might not have follow me, and there's going to be matchups where it's going to want its stabs and play rough and spiky shield, for example, where it won't have follow me, but the opponent will still have to account for it until all of the moves are revealed. So now kicking into our top half of teams, we have the Vancouver Vaporeons and Coach Keeley. This, I think, when I was saying that that's team was hard to rank, I think this one was the hardest one to rank, just because if you look at all of the Pokemon, they just do so much damage. I think Joey pointed this out in the draft, you know, other than the bottom two, really everything that's attacking you is attacking you with a super high stat, whether it be the physical or special side. Starting off with the dual Genie core of Tornadus and Landorus. Tornadus obviously acting as support and Landorus acting as the damage, but Tornadus can do some surprisingly good damage as well and really dissuade. You know, the main resistances to ground are grass and bug, and Tornadus really punishes that. So you may think, oh, I want to go Terra Flying, and then you get hit with an Icicle Spear from Baxcalibur or a Head Smash or Rock Slide from the Hisuian Arcanine. So the offensive synergy of the top four is great, especially, you know, in the Tailwind strategies that are really enabled by Tornadus. And you might think you want to shut it down with priority. No, there's Serena to block the priority. So I think like it just flows really well from Mon to Mon. A little bit on the slower side, you have Sylveon to throw out even more spread special offense. Quaquaval, I'm unsure how good it will be here, but it is really strong, and the type coverage, just like water plus fighting, will be pretty solid in some matchups, especially punishing, you know, some Terras that opponents may want to go for, such as like if they have a levitating Terra Steel potentially or something like that. You know, you have kind of a weakness to that outside of like Arcanine. Typhlosion, Tornadus can really enable that with Tailwind or Sun to click Eruption. I really am partial to the Sneasel here. Sneasel Hisui, fast coaching plus fake out. No Dire Claw, thankfully, but it's a really solid Pokemon to just, you know, mini Sneasler without the Dire Claw. Leans a little bit more supportive just because of a lower attacking stat, but still pretty solid and really, really fast at 115. And Skiploom in the potential Sun, really fleshing that out a little bit more. I don't necessarily know how much is going to come, but it can also be like Rage Powder for the team, so pretty interesting build overall. My main knock is the Trick Room matchup. Just, I feel like I've had to say that a few times. There are some really hard Trick Room teams that will do everything possible to get it up, and if it gets up, it might be a bit rough. but this team has plenty of options to prevent it from going up, either with raw damage or with some taunts. There's really options for the team, and then there's some solid priority if Trick Room does go up, and there's obviously ways around Trick Room in the Draft League setting. So that starts our top half of teams. Going into the number 9 slot, we have Shuckle King and the Philadelphia Stunkies. And this team, to me, screams Shuckle's drafting philosophy of just like kind of taking the best thing on the board. For instance, we start with Urshifu Rapid Strike, super strong mon. Obviously punishing the protects really well. And then it synergizes really well with Landorus. You kind of build like a momentum core. You don't necessarily think about it as much as you do in singles draft, but it's still a really important potential thing to operate with. Getting your Urshifu in at the right time means potentially unguardable surging strikes close combat. And Landorus does a great job, and because it doesn't have the flying stab without tearing, you might think, oh, Terra Grass is a very viable option until Talonflame comes in. Also for the speed control with the Gale Wings boosted Tailwind to go fast. Sinistcha, I think, was a bit interesting here, but if Shuckle wants to run the team a little bit more bulky, it gives him an option to do so. I was just kind of confused by it, but it's also a solid Rage Powder option for the team. Then there's Zapdos. Zapdos operates as a little bit more special offense. Talonflame can do it. It's really not doing too much damage. It's not super effective either way. Sinistra's not a primary damage dealer, so you kind of have Zapdos as your primary special offense. And all of these Pokemon are really threatening, but you know what's even more threatening? Getting them in behind a substitute. So Orthworm is a solid pick up here, and is another ground immunity. I think I was talking about it, how Aaron set up his Ursaluna to click Earthquake. That thing has Headlong Rush. The Landorus has no such option. So it's either going to get a really much weaker click in the Stomping Tantrum, or it'll be able to Earthquake, and he has some solid immunities and resistances to potentially Earthquake by the side and not worry about it too much. Getting the Pokemon in behind a substitute is great. Frostmoth, it will be a bit of a Terra Hog, but if it comes, it can set up on especially a lot of the Pokemon that are more specially oriented. Persian, I think the team really was craving the Fake Out, because Fake Out is key in enabling Urshifu, I think, because then that's how you really get your pins is, Fake Out, they can't move, they protect, they still get hit through it, so it's really key in creating pins. Colossal, I think, was a solid grab. Just, last generation, people would go like Urshifu Colossal. There is no G-Max Colossal anymore, but it still can potentially do something. And as like a in-Trick Room, anti-Trick Room option, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's relatively bulky. And then Riolu as a last pick. I really like the coaching here for Urshifu or Landorus or even Talonflame to just all be pretty solid damage dealers after the coaching, or even like Sinistcha will appreciate that defense booster, Zapdos and such. So I think that the team is pretty well rounded. No matchups seem like too bad. It's just I think that some of the points could have been slightly better allocated, but it really does scream a Shuckle King team. And so that was our first Commissioner's team. And here's our second Commissioner's team. Up at number 8 is the LA Wakers. Joey in our interview was like, you won't see the vision of my team probably, but I don't know if it was snipes or something, but I think I see the vision pretty clearly. Annihilate is the center of the show. Joey said he didn't want to have to draft a ton of Pokemon that he's drafted before, but I think Annihilate, it's a very different Pokemon in doubles than it is in singles. Just getting to abuse Rage Fist even better just because of supporting options. And Joey surrounded his team with a slew of mythical Pokemon that otherwise would not be seen in VGC. Diancie getting a really solid, accurate, relatively 95% spread physical rock option with the Diamond Storm is great, and it's super bulky. It can get off Trick Room really easily, but Bronzong can also. So if he wants the Trick Room up, he can get it up relatively consistently. And then outside of Trick Room, Deoxys Speed is a really, really fast supportive option that can also do great damage. Kind of like how Regieleki was last generation and to a lesser extent this generation, but I think Deoxys was actually an interesting pick. I just haven't seen it used too much before, but as a screen setter, super fast, it can enable the Annihilate to do even more shenanigans. Or Manaphy with the support, having a special setup threat is great here too. Mudsdale and Hydrapple really rumble well in Trick Room. Mudsdale with the stamina ability also synergizes with the beat up from Sneasel, like Annihilate will with Rage Fist. So I think that Sneasel was a great pickup here. It might be doing a little bit too much heavy lifting for a Sneasel, but it can still do a lot of work. And then Hydrapple is a great offensive piece in Trick Room. Might be a bit of a Terra Hog in some matchups, but Grass Dragon has some decent applications, especially into like water and grass types. So it will be a pretty solid option. And then Sneasel, like I mentioned, is going to have to do some heavy lifting beat ups here, but also can fake out for the team and do a lot of interesting, budget Weavile, but actually with inner focus, so it can't even be faked out itself. So that makes it a little bit better even on some teams. Oftentimes the damage of Weavile does outweigh it, but Sneasel has its own niche over Weavile. Furret and Poltergeist are a little bit of redirection for the team. For Furret more so with a more consistent follow me, and then Poltergeist can be, I think, the hospitality ability here is quite nice. All of his relatively bulky threats appreciate that 25% recovery, and I think they act as pretty solid enablers for the group. I do think just raw power wise, immediate power, there's kind of a little bit of a gap, which is why the team's not higher, but it is very well rounded. Now, getting into the top 7, first of all, I want to say thank you for still being here. We're like 40 minutes in, and we still have around a third of the teams to go. And yeah, so getting into our top 7, I think there was another little tier break. Starting with the Brooklyn Bengals. What is a Bengal? Coach Moxie boosted, I will ask you that. But he drafted starting overall with King Gambit, which, super bulky Pokemon. It really can't be denied what it wants to do with, which is usually dark offense with Kowtow Cleave and Sucker Punch. And, it can set up if it wants to. It can be bulky if it wants to. Really great user of Terra, but not necessarily needing it, which I think a lot of this team falls into. Iron Bundle, really solid speed control option. Most of the time in singles, you're looking at Iron Bundles like Revenge Killer / Damage Dealer. Here it's more support, really, really fast Icy Wind or like Revenge Kill. Still, it can do that with like booster speed, like Hydro Pumps and Ice Beams. Como-O is a great setup threat, and I think Moxie really enabled a couple of great setup threats in King Gambit and Como-O, because Como-O can kind of just do whatever it wants setup-wise. It can set up, Dragon Dances, Iron Defenses, Clangorous Souls, can do so much different stuff, and I think that it's well enabled here because of Abomasnow's Aurora Veil, being able to click that potentially, or even just setting it so that setting the snow so that Iron Bundle can click a super fast Aurora Veil. It has that option too. And then Iron Bundle obviously taking that Fizz-Def boost. Anything could potentially Terra Ice on the team to get a Fizz-Def boost, but you have to be an Ice type. Pecharunt is a great disruptor. Poison Gas will leave the opponent poisoned and, thanks to the Poison Puppeteer, confused. So that'll really disrupt opponents and start chipping them down. And, when they're chipped down, that puts them easily KOable by Sucker Punch from King Gambit, or by just like an Iron Bundle attack, or even by Extreme Speed or Jet Punch from the Arcanine and Palafin. Moxie has a plethora of priority on this team. I haven't even shouted out Ice Shard from Abomasnow because I don't necessarily know if it'll have the move slots to run it, but when it does, that's another option. We got Extreme Speed Arcanine, but Arcanine also acting as a solid Intimidate partner for the team. Slowing opponents down a little bit, can howl up as well, and can throw out some solid Will-O-Wisps for slowing down physical attackers even more. Snarl for special attackers. Another Incineroar Light, but with no fake out. And then we have Palafin acting as just, it's a bit hard because you kind of do have to lead it when it comes, but you don't have to bring it to every game. It's relatively cheap for a Palafin. Comfey, I think, is great here, just as support. Getting to click Floral Healing on half the team is really nice. Draining Kiss for priority, even more priority, is great. Tailwind Setter, Trick Room Setter can do the screens thing as well. Raichu, Alolan, team needed a little bit of fake out and other support. You see the Iron Bundle, you see the Alolan Raichu, you think maybe there will be a manual Electric Terrain week. Hard to say, but potentially could happen. And then Cleffa, acting as redirection, which the team was lacking, and friend guard support as well. It's not completely unbringable. It is still a Cleffa though. So that's our number 7 team. What is a Bingle? Number 6, we have the Toronto Maple Muse and Coach Sierra Dawn. And this team just screams well-rounded offense. You start with the Ogerpon Wellspring plus Chi-Yu. Ogerpon's great because it can do plenty of damage, but also has a solid defensive Terra option, not only going to Pure Water, but also getting a special defense boost. It can click Follow Me and do great things. Chi-Yu plus Roaring Moon might scream Potential Sun, but there's not really a weather theme here. But still, Roaring Moon is a great Tailwind setter with the booster speed option. You know, it's funny, you see all these paradoxes with booster speeds. They're like, oh my gosh, they're like such strong attackers, but they also all have great supporting kits. Terra Flying Acrobatics is great damage though. And then a little bit of Psychic Terrain options with Indeedee and Gallade. This actually is the rightful home of Indeedee Male. Getting to click Strong Expanding Forces, and Gallade plus Indeedee is kind of your anti-Trick Room core a little bit. Regieleki is a Pokemon that I want to talk about. People really have shied away from Regieleki, but I think it's still great, especially, you know, now it can use Terra boosted like Terra Blasts to be an even stronger offensive threat, but also just like still have a really fast Electro Web in matchups where Roaring Moon might not want to be a Tailwind setter, which is a-okay. And if Roaring Moon doesn't want to be a Tailwind setter, we also have Corviknight to do it a little bit more bulkily. So like this team just screams solid offense, but also like it has the bulk to round it up. Dash Spun, interesting, like, you know, it's just like a bulky option. Can do like some interesting shenanigans, has okay coverage, but overall, you know, not the strongest thing. It does take Chi-Yu hits theoretically though, which means that it's a Chi-Yu answer off the board technically. It like Loki does have an okay matchup into this team, which might be if Sierra wanted to grab it so she didn't have to face Dash Spun. That's honestly fair. Donphan, I really like Donphan in the Tailwind. It usually has just enough speed and just enough offense to kill exactly what it needs to, while also being able to fall back on Sturdy to live any one hit like a built-in Focus Sash. And Lycanroc Midnight can do some interesting things with like No Guard and such, and also has some priority with Sucker Punch, which, you know, the team doesn't have too much priority. It has an Indeedee, so you can't really justify having too much priority on the team, but it has a little bit of option, and also, you know, Rock Slide that can't miss is pretty nice. Overall, we're getting into the teams that kind of have a little bit of lighter weaknesses, but sometimes Gallade and Indeedee are a little bit too frail to really stop that Trick Room from going up, but you also have such incredible offense that it'll be pretty hard for the Trick Rooms to go up. Now, going into our top 5. We have the Immunity Idols coached by Mountay. If I personally could take over any team in the league, yes, there are 4 teams rated higher, but I would want this one. I really love Archaludon. That's why in VGC this thing is such a carry, and Mountay supported it really well, giving it access to Rain, support from the Pelipper, and also Population Bomb or Beat Up to get the physical defense boost, but also Mousehold can go offensive on its own with like Technician boosted Population Bombs, or defensively, you know, Friend Guard plus Follow Me. But it can do any role individually in a given week, and you kind of just don't know. Maybe it's just planning to support, but you still bring like a Terra Ghost just in case you're going to get Population Bomb Terra Normaled and just nuked. So overall, a great pick, especially in the Draft League, and especially enabling Archaludon. Thundurus acts as not only a manual rain setter with Prankster, but also can slow things down and appreciates that rain for 100% accurate Wild Bolt Storms or Thunders, and can also T-Wave to slow things down, Eerie Impulse to lower special attacks, Scary Face. It can do a lot of different things. Overquill is here as a solid rain option, and I think Mountay picked a bunch of great rain options in the Archaludon for damage, and Overquill and Basket Legion as Swift Swimmers, but also they don't need to be Swift Swimmers at all. Overquill can be your bulky Intimidate Mon in a given week. Basket Legion can go Adaptability, Choice Scarf, Last Respect. It's a great cleaner and can rob matchups that it had no business of winning. Berserker's an interesting threat. You know, next to Archaludon, you get the Steely Spirit. Archaludon can throw off boosted steel moves, and it's also the fake out for the team. Rhyperior, pretty solid as just an electric immunity with the Lightning Rod, and can draw attacks away from the rest of the team, which, like, we don't necessarily do too well into electric just because we're kind of a rain team. We have Archaludon to resist, but outside of that, it's just our Rhyperior and the Virizion later on. Virizion, you know, great threat to pick up just because it is a justified option. So people do have to consider that next to Mousehold potentially, or just like a fast coaching option potentially for like your Rhyperior or Basket Legion. And then there's Weirdear as a little bit of anti-trick room, another intimidate option. It has a ton of utility that on the singles side you don't see, but in VGC it can actually do a ton of different things. It was actually a pretty hot commodity this draft cycle. So overall, team has plenty of different directions it can go while being very centered around the rain. It has a clear vision of what it wants to do, but also plenty of ways to diverge from that and throw opponents for a loop, which is something that I'm really looking for in this team, and I think he did really, really well. So now moving into our number 4 team. I don't even know how to say Liv's team name, but something Lilligans. And starting it off, we got Raging Bolt, which is one of my favorite Pokemon to use in VGC. Super versatile, you know, put an AV on it and it won't take too much damage. It can slow opponents down with Electro Web, snarl them down. Really bulky Pokemon that just doesn't die. And VGC players, you might not have a lot of experience with Volcanion, especially in the VGC thing. Really bulky Pokemon that does not die and does a lot of damage. So she basically got 2 of those. And supported it with Veil from Alolan Ninetales. And then I think that makes for a super solid option. And then those 2 kind of are great for Tail Room. So we got an okay Tailwind setter in Torrentee. Singles players seeing Torrentee and Garchomp on his team, especially in Gen 8, you might have been like, wow. But in doubles, Torrentee's a little bit worse. Still pretty good, though. And then Garchomp, obviously, it is a solid physical attacker, which the team was lacking. You might want to try to bring hard Trick Room on this, but no, Conkeldurr is super good, slower than a lot of main Trick Room threats, and can output a ton of damage with Guts. Tinkaton here for Fake Out does a great thing. Stantler as a 1-point bulky Intimidate Eviolite Pokemon, kind of like Weirdear Light. And, you know, it's a Trick Room setter / remover. Glaceon in the snow can potentially do a little bit of bullshit with like Snow Cloak, and then just Strong Blizzard just has a pretty strong special attack stat. And Trevenant for a little bit of utility and has some types that give it some interesting defensive profile on this team. I don't necessarily know that it maximized the value of any given Pokemon on the team, but in exchange, all of the Pokemon offer such big value. And it probably did max out the value of Alolan Ninetales, I think. Just being able, it has such a good Aurora Veil on this team. Can also output solid Ice-type damage just pretty fast. I do wish the speed control was slightly better, but now I'm just grasping at straws. I think it can do everything really well. But we still have 3 more teams to get to, and our 3rd place team is the Golden State Gallades coach OG Albina, and we started this team out with a Chien-Pao. That's right, we did a Pao Night team in this league, which is crazy. Owen got Chien-Pao. Great solid enabler, and Owen rounded it out with a ton of physical threats. I don't know why there's a Raichu there. Owen does not have Raichu. My apologies. We have Chien-Pao, Ogerpon, which is great for a speed option. Super strong with wood hammers as well, and can also just click Follow Me. Dragonite is great as an extreme speed option. That Raichu is actually a Magmar, which is one of Owen's favorite Pokemon to use. Is another Follow Me option, so the double Follow Me support can get really out of hand for potentially Dragonite or even Azumarill. Azumarill can do incredible work with like a Belly Drum set next to multiple Follow Me Pokemon to really get that off, and Chien-Pao for even stronger potential Aqua Jets. So I think it really does a good job of maximizing the value of Azumarill and also potentially maximizing the value of Dragonite as a solid Tailwind option. Then you have Scrafty for Intimidate and Fake Out, really good roll compression on the team. Has access to a bunch of moves to really slow down the opponent's damage-wise with like Snarl and such, and great AV Pokemon potentially. Thunderous Therian offers some really, really needed special attack. Before it was just Magmar, so also having the Thunderous Therian on the team means that you'll be outputting incredible amounts of damage, and instead of outputting just purely physical damage, you'll have the special damage as well. And it also has incredible item versatility. You wouldn't think it at first, but it's a great focus sasher, good with the Covert Cloak, good with potentially like Assault Vest, good choice user. So overall, I think Thunderous is great, and it also mitigates the need for a ground type on the team, which might have been hard to fit, but we have a Volt Absorber, which is nice. Delphox provides a really needed answer to Steels. Before it was just Scrafty, which doesn't output a lot of damage, Magmar, which is more so in the supportive role, but Delphox really does incredible damage to those steel types and is relatively fast and has some interesting applications in doubles, especially as like a potential, imprison for Trick Room type of Pokemon. And then there is Skarmory last. It's like a budget Corviknight. There are some matchups where, Skarmory will do great, especially if the team leans super physically like this one does. Not saying that this would be the reason, but like into like an Ursaluna, for example, like Aaron's team, Skarmory potentially could come into that to try to shut that Pokemon down and do like Iron Defense, Body Press shenanigans, like a Corviknight, but way cheaper. So now we can get into our number 2 overall, which is the New York Eviltals and coach Joe UX9. And this team is really built around that second pick, Gouging Fire. Rillaboom, super versatile. It can fake out. It can do plenty of damage with like a Choice Band set. Can be Assault Vest. Can use Grassy Seed quite well. Overall, adding a good amount of versatility to Joe's team and also help out that Gouging Fire. Potentially set up with Dragon Dances. Potentially click, a ton of damage with Heat Crash. Can get an instant speed boost with Howl, and can potentially Howl support the partners too. It's not the only thing that can do damage, but the team is really well built to enable it. And then you get another fake out option and do a ton of damage with Sneasler. Potentially Terra Poison is incentivized into Sneasler and also Rillaboom, which is like kind of my one gripe with the team. I'll get to it at the end, but overall really solid team. And then Milotic, coil up, coil option, but also just like do solid special damage and dissuade intimidate with the competitive ability, because that top 3 can easily be intimidated, but with competitive it really dissuades it. Galarian Moltres provides solid spread damage with the Fiery Wrath and can also be a great just bulky damage dealer, and also really dissuade physical opposition just because of a like Terra Dark foul play. Mimikyu is a great enabler for all sorts of different strategies. Can slow opponents down with the disguise ability, trick them up. Can potentially bring like Trick Room to dissuade Trick Room, which the team might not want to deal with potentially. So I think Mimikyu is a great glue piece for the team. Raikou, I wish there was a point where it was Electabuzz, and I think that was a little bit better for the team, but Raikou is still a solid damaging option. Maybe he wanted the offense a little bit more, which I completely understand, just because like really Milotic and Galarian Moltres, especially Galarian Moltres, is pretty strong, but a little bit more special offense and electric type offense is good just to break bulky waters with other than Rillabooms to make it easier for Gouging Fire to win. Registeel, it's like the Iron Defense Body Press Pokemon. It does really, really well in that role, and I think this team can potentially maximize how well it can do. And then Yanma, Compound Eyes Hypnosis, is really broken. It's obviously a Yanma, so it's not going to be able to do it too often, but just being like a Focus Sash Compound Eyes Hypnosis or like Speed Boost Tailwind, it's kind of like a Yanmega Light. It's not like Yanmega was really relying on damage as its main form of utility, so it can do that just as fine. One gripe, there is no like ground or psychic type here, which means Terra Poison defensively is solid into like the team perfectly neutral. And even better than neutral in the case of Sneasler, which is a pretty big threat that can easily be Terra'd into with almost no downside. So that's kind of my one gripe with the team, but other than that, a very fundamentally sound and solid team that can really maximize the potential of specifically like the Gouging Fire. And now into the number 1 slot, Dondozo, aka James and the Jubilife Piplups. Dondozo team got number 1, but there's so much more to this team than Dondozo, which is why it was able to be ranked so highly. James started off with Goldingo, which is a Pokemon I know he has a ton of experience with in like the real life circuit. And it's a super strong start for a team. Great solid spread damage with the Make It Rain. Good as Gold is a really, really strong ability. And overall can just output tons of damage, can be like choice with Trick to really potentially hamper opponents. And then you get Dondozo plus Tatsugiri. You can also do like solo Dozo things with like Ting Lu plus Dondozo to be like an unbreakable duo. And then before Dondozo comes out, you can spread poisons with Glamora, which is a great strategy for Dondozo to slow the game down even more. So he can play it slow, but he can also go pretty fast with like Enamorus to do a ton of damage alongside like Meowscarada, Paldean Tauros. Outside of like the slow mode, it can all do pretty well. And Goldango kind of fits on everything, which is why this team kind of, I think, was able to come together so well. but obviously Enamorus is great as like a fast special attacker, a little bit faster than Goldengo. Obviously Glamora is also a great special attacker. And then on the physical side, Tauros, Paldean, great for Intimidate to slow down the opposition even more. With Tinglu's ability, you kind of get that special side reduction. And then with Intimidate, you reduce from the physical side. Meowscarada is an example of Dondozo counterplay, just like auto crit flower tricks. But obviously it's on this team, so he doesn't have to worry about it. And other than that, still a really solid fast damage dealer. And then you have Fletchinder for Tailwind, which I think was really important for this team, just being able to get that fast Tailwind option. It can come, which is what really I think it needed to be able to do. It doesn't need to be a sole focus of the team. I think the team can rumble really, really well in any given speed, which is why I'm not knocking it too hard for the speed control not being amazing. And obviously we got Tatsugiri here to jump into the Dondozo's mouth. It's not going to really do too much outside of that. There's not really maybe we could see it versus Mountay as a Stormray option, but I don't really think that team is reliant enough on the water type damage for there to ever be a justification. I don't think there's any team where you're ever justified in not bringing Commander Tatsugiri plus Dondozo. So when Dondozo's coming, it leads to very specific prep, but with the rest of this team, it means that some of your times your Dozo Giri prep will just not be applicable when it's just Dozo Tinglu. And I think the team's just so overall well-rounded that it's just going to be really, really hard to prep for. So thank you. These were my power rankings. This is one of the longest times I've ever but one of the longest times I've ever recorded for. And so I really just want to say thank you for making it this far. If you enjoyed, please leave a subscription button. If you just listened to me ramble for an hour, hopefully that means you liked me. Maybe you're just looking for your team. Maybe you're just looking for the team you're rooting for, but thank you for making it to this far at the end. Leave a comment. Let me know what you would change. Find that tier maker description. Tag me in your potential tier lists. I'm curious to see what other people have in mind for their teams and where they rank everything else. So let's see how the season shakes out, and let's see how accurate these predictions were. I'm Jesse504 or JBear Pokemon signing off. Peace.